I'm Sarina Farb, and I'm 27, and I'm a vegan educator and activist, and I was born and raised vegan, so I've been vegan my entire life, and I have never intentionally consumed any meat, dairy, eggs, or anything that comes from animals. So I don't have a specific memory of the first time that I heard or knew the word vegan. It was something I always just grew up with and grew up knowing and was constantly talking about. So my parents talked to me about veganism from pretty much day one. And so as early as I can remember, I knew we were vegan and I knew I was vegan and identified with that. And this was even really simple. Like, a lot of families I know that raised vegan children, it was just kind of a diet or a thing they did. They didn't really talk about it. And we did talk about it when it was, like when we'd be eating a veggie hot dog or a veggie burger. My parents would make sure and say, like, is that a real hot dog you're eating? Or how is that different than the hot dogs your friends eat? And I'd say, it's vegan. What is that? And they ask, what does that mean? And I would say, it means it doesn't have animals. Real hot dogs come from animals, but I don't eat animals. So we eat vegan hot dogs. Veganism is a philosophy, but it was first coined in 1944 by Donald Watson, who founded the Vegan Society. And I find his writings incredibly inspiring and what we should be looking to when we talk about the definition of veganism. And so there's the official definition from the Vegan Society of the UK today that essentially says, and I'm not going to get it perfect, but something along the lines of veganism is a philosophy and way of living that seeks to exclude as far as is possible and practicable all forms of cruelty to and exploitation of animals for food, clothing, labor, and any other purpose. And in my own words, from reading the original writings of Donald Watson and Leslie Cross and the early organizers of the Vegan Society, it really is a principle and a philosophy about nonviolence and non-exploitation of our fellow earthlings. It's not a diet. It is kind of a lifestyle today, but it's really this principle about not harming others that we can then apply to what we eat, to what we wear, to the entertainment and things we choose to participate in, to the cosmetics we wear. But it's not any of those specific things. It's the idea that we don't want to unnecessarily use, exploit, and harm others.
Take us back to when you first realized that other people are eating animals and you're not. What was that experience like?
Honestly, I was kind of confused. Like, in my head, I think I justified and explained the difference as, well, I know this information and my peers don't. And this was probably how my parents explained it to me. We know this information about where food comes from. Your friends, your peers, they don't know. And what this really led me to do, though, was tell everyone around me because I believed they didn't know. And I believed if they knew that meat and dairy and eggs hurt animals, well, that obviously my friends were caring people, they wouldn't want to hurt animals either. So I viewed it as sort of, I had this insider information. I knew the truth. We live in a, confused society where there's lots of propaganda and marketing. Didn't know those terms necessarily when I was a child, but essentially I viewed it as sort of, I had this inside information, other people didn't. And because I had this information, I chose to live differently. I chose to live vegan. And if other people had the information I had, obviously they would choose to live vegan too, because it was just, in my head, it was that simple. No one wants to hurt animals if we don't have to. Like, they just don't know. And because of this, I became an activist at a pretty young age, seeking to tell everyone around me what I thought they didn't know. So I remember one particular instance when I was about 7 years old and I used to do competitive gymnastics. And we used to get these goodie bags at, meets that would be filled with candy. Different parents would bring them. And I would look through it to see if there was anything I could eat. Usually there wasn't. And I would just pass out the non-vegan candy to other people around me. And sometimes they would ask, why don't you want to eat this candy? Or what's in candy that's not vegan? And it was usually gelatin. And I would then proceed to describe in fairly graphic detail what I knew about how gelatin was made and how it comes from, all the leftover slaughterhouse byproducts and animal parts that are boiled down. And I thought that was obviously so gross and so disgusting. No kid in their right mind would want to eat that once they knew what gelatin was and it was in their candy. And I remember being so baffled when I would tell them. And then one girl, was like, okay, so whatever. And then popped the candy in her mouth. And I was just sort of dumbfounded. I just told you what was in that. That didn't change anything. And being very confused by how other people, couldn't see things the way I did or didn't adjust their actions the way I expected them to.
Were your parents vegan? And if so, do you know why or how they came to be vegan?
Yeah, so my parents both were and are still vegan. They've been vegan for about 30 years now. And it was mainly my mother. She was born and raised in the Midwest, but had a job prior to me being born, working in the pharmaceutical industry. And part of her job had her going into factory farms, chicken hatcheries, and animal testing labs to sort of sell her company's products there. And she'd always been an animal lover, always viewed herself as a, social justice concerned, caring person. And when she saw what was going on in these industries, she decided for ethical reasons that she did not want to support or participate in that and wanted to opt out. And she had a couple experiences that she's told me about where she saw people in those industries that she knew to be good, caring people outside of that, but that they sort of, turned a blind eye and ignored horrible things right in front of them. And so she saw that they weren't, terrible, evil people, but that they were just able to turn away from injustice. And she basically decided that if she ever had kids, she wanted to raise kids that would not turn away to any injustice happening in front of them. And so she decided she would raise us vegan. My dad was not vegan when they met, but she would come home telling him stories of what she had seen during her work. She started teaching him about the information she learned once she went vegan, and then started taking him to vegan and animal rights conferences. And he was vegan very shortly thereafter as well. Growing up, I always knew this was about ethics, this was about animals, this was about justice. It wasn't, and of course we learned about, health and nutrition, all the other things that are benefits of, a vegan way of living and ethic, the environmental benefits, all of those other things I've always known about and learned about them as well. But I've always been really clear that my parents' reason and what they taught me about veganism it was fundamentally a principle of justice and not wanting to facilitate harming others, whether unconsciously or consciously.
Were you breastfed, and was your mother vegan during that time?
Absolutely. My mother breastfed me. Both my sister and I were extended breastfed for several years. And my mom was entirely vegan during that entire time. And during her pregnancy, she had a vegan pregnancy as well. So I have essentially never been fed any kind of animal-based, nutrients or whatever. I don't think they're nutrients during any of that. And she thrived, I thrived, breastfeeding worked really well. And breastfeeding, just for the record, is also most definitely vegan. I have a lot of people, say, well, they come on my, Born Vegan YouTube channel and they're like, well, were you breastfed? You haven't actually been vegan from birth then, because that's an animal product. And I think it's the most ridiculous thing ever, because it shows a huge misunderstanding of what veganism is, which is about, again, not harming and exploiting others. My mother willingly and very intentionally wanted to breastfeed me. She was, not being exploited or harmed in any way by that process. Breastfeeding is most definitely vegan as well.
What was school like growing up as a vegan?
So I did a bunch of different schooling. I homeschooled off and on. I did Montessori school, I did Waldorf school, I did public school, I did a lot of different stuff. Around the time of 6th grade-ish were some of my most interesting school experiences. That's when I was attending a Montessori school, which actually is about essentially peace education. That's kind of the motto of Montessori. So it was a private alternative school that really prioritized justice and compassion, but was unfortunately very not supportive of veganism in many ways. And I was very much an activist at that time. So I definitely had moments where, I brought my own lunch to school every day and kids kind of teased me a little bit, thought my food smelled or looked weird. But most of the issues I sort of had, I brought about myself because that was still around that time period, and I was still in a phase where I really believed if people knew this information, they would change. And that my, again, friends were caring, wonderful people who, if they just knew what animals went through or really made the connection that they were eating animals, they would stop. So I would frequently bring graphic, why vegan flyers, or even if you like meat flyers, to school and, literally open them up while, the person across from me at the table was eating a burger and be like, this is where your burger comes from. Don't you see? Like, this is a cut up animal and look at what they went through. And I don't necessarily recommend those activism tactics today, but that's what I was doing at, 11 and 12 years old. And I got a very mixed reaction out of that particular school environment, where several children did actually go vegetarian and said it was because of the information I shared. And so I kind of jokingly say, like, half the class went vegetarian, half the class hated me. And I had a lot of issues with the teacher in particular as well. She was not very understanding of veganism and did not seem to get that it was an ethical issue or how important it was to me, because in the Montessori setting, you sort of take control of your own environment. So in the kitchen, we had to clean up after lunch and do our own dishes. It wasn't just like, public school where you get a tray and you return it to the, when you're done with the lunch line. We actually would have lunch delivered, or a lot of kids would bring their own lunch, and then we had a kitchen environment where we would clean up the dishes. And the chores in the classroom rotated, on a weekly basis. And when it came time, to be my turn to do the dishes, I tried to, reasonably speak with the teacher and say, I bring my own lunch, so I'm not creating this mess. And, this was a meat casserole that was served. I have ethical issues. I don't want to have to put my hands in that and clean it and touch it and, give me a different chore. I wasn't just trying to get out of chores. I was like, I'll trade with someone. Can I do something else? Like this, it goes against my ethics. Like, I don't want to participate in this. And she basically acted like I was just trying to shirk my duty and get out of chores, and refused and was like, nope, this is your chore. You have to do it. Didn't listen to me until, I brought my parents into it. And then as soon as my parents stepped in, she was like, oh, of course, we totally understand, we'll do. And it was just very frustrating to me that in a school environment that was supposed to prioritize children and their independence and speaking up and justice, that it wasn't respected. And this same teacher actually tried to even censor me at one point. She didn't like hearing about veganism and didn't like me talking about veganism to the other kids, and tried to ban me from speaking about veganism, in the classroom at all. And I was just like, that's ridiculous, free speech, and you can't ban me. And a lot of these conversations were coming up because friends and peers were asking me why I was vegan, or why I was eating the things I was eating, or doing the things I was doing. And so I was like, you just want me to refuse to answer their questions? Like, I can't do that. When they're asking, I want to, share this information and answer their questions. And so it wasn't very successful, but it was a very tense relationship in many ways, with kind of a constant ongoing battle between trying to even just get respect for my values and ethics. The school took the kids on a fishing trip. They had a lake in the backyard essentially, and they would go fishing. And I and my mom tried very hard to convince them not to allow the kids to go fishing, because the rest of the time, again, it was all about peace education. You couldn't touch snakes, you couldn't touch turtles, didn't want to disrupt natural habitat. But then we do fishing, and they'd say, well, it's catch and release. And so I tried to sort of get that stopped while I was there. And I think we did for a little while, and that made several students like really, really mad at me. I remember one student who had gone vegetarian after information I had shared came at me one day, and she goes, I'm not going to be vegetarian anymore because you stopped our fishing trip. And I was like, how does that relate? Like, I don't want you to be vegetarian for me, or, I want you to not eat animals for the animals. Like, you're not getting back at me by not being vegetarian. Like, that's not, how this works. So there were a lot of very interesting interactions that I had through kind of grade school time period that, again, mostly I was very outspoken and kind of pushed back on things a lot. So, yeah, it was interesting.
What were your grades like?
Not 100% straight A student, but generally, at least until later in high school. But I had mostly A's and a few B's. And in college, I went to Grinnell College, which is a private liberal arts school in Iowa, and very selective and rigorous. And I will say, for context, in college, there were 2 people in my entire class that graduated with a 4.0 GPA, and that's usually the expectation. Some years go by where no one even graduates with a 4.0 at Grinnell. So in college, mostly A's and B's. Again, not a 4.0 in college.
Were you ever bullied, ashamed, or embarrassed for being vegan?
I was a pretty oblivious child in many ways, and I let a lot of stuff go over me and didn't take it personally or get, too bothered by it. Definitely there were moments, and a lot of it I don't really remember. I sort of hear about it from other people, but I was kind of oblivious to it. But I had some teachers in high school. I was on the debate team, and I loved the debate team. I loved the debate environment. That's where I spent a lot of my time in high school, after school hours, on the weekends, at debate tournaments. And it was a pretty close-knit group. A lot of comments from both the teacher and other students, like, oh, is that your vegan food? It smells weird again. Like, oh, don't use my microwave. I don't want you to stink up the place with your smelly vegan food. Just kind of a lot of that kind of stuff. And I didn't really let it bother me because I've dealt with comments like that a lot, and did some earlier, like I already talked about, in grade school. Nothing really major that really stood out, and I was pretty strong in my convictions and just didn't take things personally, so it wasn't a huge deal.
How did you deal with being different as a vegan child?
I was very proud of being different. Actually, that was kind of my thing. I was so proud of being vegan and believed so much in the ethics of it that sometimes I probably unnecessarily made myself seem weirder, or even made myself more of a target for, bullying and incidences, because I would brag about being vegan or attending, a circus protest on the weekend, or talked extensively about the vegan conferences I attended, talked about sometimes even the weirder things that my family did and how we were around veganism, food, activism, animal rights, all of that. And, I could have just sort of been quiet, not talked about it, and probably wouldn't have seemed so different or been so different. But I was very proud of that and bragged about it a lot. And I think I had a certain amount of definitely a little bit of righteousness, and I think I've calmed that down a little bit today, but I have always just felt so strongly about not harming and eating animals, and that is so clear to me that I just couldn't understand. And I have struggled with that a lot, just not understanding how when other people have this information, they don't change. As I've gotten older, I've come to a new understanding of humans and psychology and society. But going into college, for example, I was going to this liberal arts college that had a history of social justice, was known for being progressive and on the cutting edge of things. And I naively, truly believed at one point, I think before going there, that there just hadn't been a vegan activist like me on campus. And when I showed up, I would do activism. I would change the dining hall. I would make it the first vegan college in the country. And, I knew that was a little bit grandiose, but I still naively thought that, I could make that big of a difference, that there just the students there, the peers, the other college students, they just didn't know. Like, here we are, this social justice campus. They just haven't been informed about animal rights and haven't thought about it. Once they hear that, once I start, a vegan club there or an animal rights club, they'll join me. We'll make such a huge difference. And that was not the reality I experienced at all. I faced so much pushback. Not bullying so much, but we can talk about college. And I faced so much pushback and so many issues that came up with censorship and other students and sort of being attacked online. And it was over my activism. It wasn't, because I was vegan. It was because of the activism I was doing. But there were times it was definitely hard and it was confusing because this has always been so clear to me. And I tell people, that's the hardest part about growing up vegan and being vegan. It's not lack of, vegan options or not being able to participate or feeling, it's none of that. It's being so aware of such a horrible, violent, massive scale atrocity and injustice going on right beneath our face, that most people are consuming the products of on a daily basis, paying for and supporting. And these are good people who I like and value and who care about justice and the same values I do, and yet they don't see this the way I do. And that is a very difficult thing to grapple with.
What are some common questions you get when people realize that you're vegan from birth?
One of the most common ones is, have I ever felt deprived, or have I ever wanted to try, meat, dairy, or eggs? That's probably the most common one I get. Like, well, have you ever wanted to try it? Did you ever try it? Did you ever have a phase, a non-vegan phase? And I can solidly say absolutely not, because those things have never been food to me. So meat especially, I see a dead animal when I look at a piece of meat. I don't see food. And that's just how I view it. It's harder, with baked goods, things like cakes or cupcakes and muffins that look very much like the vegan versions of those things that I do know and enjoy. And yeah, do I, see a chocolate cake at the store and think like, I like chocolate cake? Yes, but if I read the label or instantly know that it has eggs or milk in it, it's like, nope, not food. That's not the chocolate cake I eat. Nope. So I can want to eat chocolate cake. I can look at these things and recognize the things like them that I like. But I have absolutely no desire and have never had a desire to try animal products because, the comparison I make, and I think I said this to my high school students when I used to teach high school, I turned the question around and I said, well, do you feel like you're ever missing out because you've never eaten cat or dog? To any person that would ask me that, are you missing out because you've never tried cat? Are you missing out because you've never tried elephant? That's how I feel when you ask me if I'm missing out because I've never tried cow or pig or chicken. They're animals. It's not food. They're not food. So that's the most common one I get. The other one, have I felt weak or low energy, sort of more the health side of things? And again, I can say, nope, I've never had issues with energy or feeling full. I did competitive gymnastics for many years when I was younger. I did cross country while I was in college. I've run 2 half marathons since then. It certainly has not held me back in any way, shape, or form.
How do you feel when you see other people eating animals, and how has this maybe changed over time?
This is something that really, I feel like I go through cycles. I can become very desensitized, and there are other times where I'm very aware of the violence on someone's plate. So while I was in high school, and when I was eating lunch every day around friends and people that weren't vegan, I think I had a couple years where I learned to just, not think about it, not see it, not really, consciously take in what was going on. It was just kind of pushed to the side of my mind. It became a lot harder for me in college, though. Again, I was living on campus, eating in a dining hall, but that's when I started getting a lot more into activism, especially in college. And it became very difficult for me. There wasn't a moment where I could sit down and see my friends eating something that I wasn't aware that that was, a piece of bloody flesh, that that was an animal that had been violently killed unnecessarily, and that people around me were just laughing and joking and acting like this was no big deal. And I felt like, I was looking at murder and again, a horrible injustice. And sometimes it became too much for me, but I'm a very extroverted person. I'm very social. And I know there's debate and talk about, the liberation pledge, like whether or not we should sit at the table with other people eating animal products. And I've gone back and forth on that one a lot. I've never taken the liberation pledge, mostly because even though I wanted to, I cared more about being around friends. That's something that I felt guilty about at many times. Like if I really was strong enough in my ethics, I would refuse to sit at the table with people. I would, eat alone in my room or whatever. And I don't anymore. I think, we all have to balance that for ourselves. And in college, it made sense that I didn't want to cut myself off that much, and I didn't really have other options. The dining hall was, where we were eating and what we were doing, and it was more important to me to be connected with others. And so I think I, again, learned to sort of try and shut it down, look the other way, and become desensitized to the reality of what was going on, because otherwise it's like consciously there. I can't not think about it. I'm very aware that that's not just food, that that's an animal, that that's violence. But I've come to a place today where I'm not in those situations. It is much easier for me to avoid being around people eating animal products. And most of my friends at this point know, and I've been sort of upfront with them, like I don't like eating around animal products, so let's go to a vegan restaurant, or I'll cook, or agree to, eat vegan if we go out. And they, my friends today are respectful of that. And so I'm able to avoid that the large, vast majority of the time. But I'm not 100% if I go to a wedding or a family, event, or things where, there's appetizers or food being served. Again, I just kind of try to avoid it, not think about it, look away. And I don't avoid those situations 100%. And so that's it's fluctuated. That's kind of where I'm at. And it's much harder for me to see meat than it is, again, cakes, baked goods, things that have dairy and eggs that don't obviously, like they could easily be something that's vegan. But meat is incredibly difficult for me to see and watch people eating.
Do you feel like you have a deeper connection with people or animals because you don't eat them?
I don't know. That's, I'm actually not the world's largest animal lover, and I think this is something that's, a lot of debate about this as well. I know many vegans that think, they like animals more than people almost. They feel like they're more at home with them and more connected to them, or they're huge animal lovers. And you don't have to be an animal lover to be vegan, just to be clear. I think that's something that a lot of people get wrong. I think animal lovers should be vegan. If you really love animals, don't eat them. But at the same time, like, you don't have to love women or want to be in a relationship with them to be against sexism or to believe that women have rights, It's very much the same thing. Like, I believe that animals, our fellow earthlings, deserve the rights to their own bodies and lives and to not be used for human purposes. I like being around dogs and cats. I volunteer at a local sanctuary, an animal rescue near me sometimes. But I don't actually feel like I have the connection that some people I know do, where they just feel really, really connected to animals. And I grew up with a cat, Maple. He was sweet like maple syrup. I named him. He was wonderful. I miss him so much. He was an amazing companion. I felt very connected to him. But I don't have any rescues now, and my life is pretty busy. I don't feel the need. I wish I had the ability to rescue and give homes to companion animals right now. And I'm not at a time and place where I can do that. And I don't feel, like I'm really missing that connection either. I'm okay without it. So long way of saying, I don't know, I don't actually feel that connected to animals. People, I don't know, I find myself kind of jaded at the state of the world and how people act sometimes. So it's brought me closer to some amazing activists. I'm very grateful for the people I have met through vegan events and activism. So it's brought me closer to those people.
Are you happy with having started out as a vegan child?
I am so grateful that my parents raised me vegan. I feel like, being raised vegan really isn't any different than being raised with any particular set of values. It's no different than parents who care about social justice or care about anti-racism and want to raise their children to be, loud anti-racist advocates or anti-sexist advocates, or, environmentalists. If you raise children to recycle and not waste and, all these other things, like, no one bats an eye. No one looks at that and says, like, oh, those parents forced their values on their kids. But that's what they say when they find out I'm raised vegan. And my response is, I was simply taught the truth and taught to stand for justice. And I am so grateful for that. I am so grateful for the critical thinking skills that this upbringing taught me. And learning to deal with difference, learning to be different, learning to not just go along with everything happening in the world, learning to think critically about it. All of that, I feel like, are things that have come from being raised vegan.
In what ways has being raised vegan hindered your life?
I don't feel like veganism has hindered my life in any way, other than, well, I guess I would say this. It is harder to fit in. It is harder to be a normal child and not be jaded at the world, and I am aware of that. That is something I think about. Like, I have at times, especially growing up vegan, sort of looked critically at peers around me that would just, go shopping and, loved Black Friday shopping, eat animals, party, barbecue, and didn't seem to care about making a difference or the state of the world or any of the other things that I cared about. I am a pretty serious person, and sometimes I think I could do with a little bit more joy and playfulness in my life, and that, if you don't know anything or don't focus on the bad in the world and just think about, enjoying your own life, it's a lot easier to go around in the world that way. I think you're probably lacking some meaning and grounding if that's, the only way you're living your life. But I have come to a new place where I think joy and just being and experiencing this life that we've been given is really important. And maybe I've been a little too serious at times and a little too focused on saving the world, changing the future, stopping climate change. And it can be depressing. It can be disheartening to think about the reality of what we actually are doing on this planet, how we are living, how we are treating others, the violence, the war, all the horrible things going on. And I think I'm in a place now where I think balance is important, and maybe growing up vegan kept me in a more serious state of mind and more focused on some of the bad in the world. Maybe that's just who I am as a person too, so I can't say.
How has being raised vegan been advantageous?
The biggest thing that has come out of being vegan for me is my critical thinking skills. I feel like I can apply those to everything in the world now, so I don't take anything at face value. Growing up, going to doctors and having them tell me, oh my God, you're gonna have weak bones, you've never had dairy, you've never drank milk, you're gonna be so deficient, I need to run all these tests on you. And doctors who, we often hold up in Western society as the epitome of expertise and science, and having those personal experiences of realizing our medical system isn't always the most evidence-based. Doctors are fallible people too. Like, I need to do my own research. I need to actually look into the data, look at things for myself, not just take whatever the media tells me, not just take what are probably products of advertising campaigns and multinational corporations at face value. I really carry that with me now, and I question everything. I research everything, whether it's, the type of schooling and what makes the most sense for education to health and nutrition, whatever it is. I'm always looking at everything with a critical lens as an independent thinker.
Do you think being raised vegan has helped protect you from chronic diseases or benefited your health in any way?
Not just vegan. My parents also cared a lot about health and nutrition when I was younger, so we did things like, avoided high fructose corn syrup, artificial colors and flavors. Not 100% when it comes to things like sugar, but they were very health conscious, and that was an added piece of the diet that we ate, at least. And I was breastfed as well, and I feel very confident that my health would have been worse, especially if I'd consumed dairy when I was younger. And I don't really know, but I can say this. I have never taken any pharmaceuticals in my life. I've never had an aspirin, an ibuprofen, antibiotics. I've never been sick enough to need them. And I think it's important to point out, veganism is not, and a plant-based diet is not a cure-all. Obviously, vegans still get sick, vegans still die, I still get colds and, normal life things. Ear infections were so common in lots of my peers as a kid, like ear infections, sinus infections, strep throat. Most kids are like on antibiotics a lot, and I never had anything bad enough that I needed that. I've never broken a bone. I had like one cavity filled my entire life, and it was shallow enough for on a baby tooth or something. I didn't even need Novocaine and never needed to be drilled out. So I've never had painkillers, and I'm sure there's lots of other factors, but I think altogether, eating a healthy plant-based diet, trying to avoid environmental toxins, trying to live in a way that's generally, very health conscious, I'm sure that has been a big piece of why that's how I've been able to live. Especially because allergies actually really run in my dad's family especially. He used to have like horrible allergies, could hardly breathe in the fall. He has food allergies, a lot of people in his family do. And dairy especially, there's a lot of science talking about how much dairy can predispose you to allergies. And I think, had I been consuming dairy and animal, products, there's a good chance I would have allergies that I don't have today.
What are the most important reasons for you to be vegan now?
Animals, number one. And I consider myself a holistic vegan, so I am not just an animal rights, activist, and that's why I actually prefer the term vegan activist, because it feels more holistic to me. And I feel like even though veganism is about animals, I do care about health. I also care about environmental issues. And I've been to animal rights conferences and places where, people don't care about the issue of plastic or dismiss health concerns. And that's never really resonated with me and felt most on point. So I am first and foremost vegan for animals because I have no right to take something that's not mine, to harm and exploit others when I don't need to. But I also feel like the vegan principle and way of living and a plant-based diet can help solve so many of the issues in our world. I feel like, how can we begin to talk about social justice and environmental issues, but especially social justice and making the world a better place, when we are consuming violence, most people, 3 times a day, when our society is built on this violent system that also happens to be one of the most destructive, environmentally polluting, and largest causes of climate change, and the same diet that's based off of violence and eating products of, exploitation and harm also happens to be killing humans. It's, heart disease and diabetes and these chronic illnesses that are very clearly tied with eating a diet high in animal protein. It's all connected. You can't separate that out. And so it's very telling to me that the way of living and eating that happens to not harm animals also happens to be the way of living and eating that could help fix our healthcare system, that could save human lives from chronic illness, and could help reverse and stop climate change and stop polluting and over-consuming resources on this planet. So it's very, I guess I take a little bit more of a spiritual approach in that way of like, to me, those are all very clear signs. We are not meant to be eating animals, and ethics is the driver, but these other things matter too. And if we want to create a better, kinder, more sustainable, compassionate world that treats all beings with dignity and respect, it has to start with stopping animal agriculture, with stopping eating animals.
How has being raised vegan affected your relationships?
Right now, it just so happens that a lot of my closest friends are vegan. That has not been the case throughout much of my life. And veganism has impacted a lot of friendships. I've definitely lost a lot of friends over the years who, and I don't know for sure, it's not like they told me, I'm not going to be friends with you because of your veganism or your vegan activism. But I can tell. I can tell that being outspoken makes people very self-conscious and uncomfortable. And I've never been one to sort of go out of my way to say like, oh, I don't care if you eat animal products, or, oh no, like this is just what I do, like you do you, like that's not me. I'm an activist, and I, of course, want everyone to not eat animals. I want everyone to stop participating in this system. And so I am very much a people pleaser though, so I don't go out of my way, and I haven't in the past, to sort of, shake my finger in friends' faces and be like, oh, how dare you eat meat today? Like, I'm not gonna sit with, I was actually pretty quiet in my personal relationships, unless and until people ask me. And if they ask me what I think, I generally was honest with them. And I could tell in a number of friendships in particular where people, I think, were very self-conscious, and it was kind of an issue for them. I took one friend we went on a road trip together, and I took her to an animal sanctuary. And yeah, have I wanted my friends to go vegan? Have I tried to convince them of that? Yes, usually in gentle, subtle ways, like, hey, this is something that's really important to me. Will you, come over and watch this documentary Cowspiracy with me? Or, this film Peaceable Kingdom. It's a really good film. Would you at least watch it and tell me what your thoughts are? So I've approached it with friends more, especially, more recently, through that angle. Or like taking them to a sanctuary. So I took one friend to an animal sanctuary, and I could just tell the entire time that she was very much sort of zoning out and not wanting to be present, hearing the stories of the animals. And as soon as we left, I was sitting there thinking like, this should have done it. Like, didn't you hear the stories about those chickens and eggs and milk? And we get to a gas station, she's like, I need a bottle of milk. And like goes out of her way to, like, we leave this sanctuary to buy a bottle of milk. Yeah, it was very frustrating. And so I've definitely had moments like that where it has been hard for me to accept people doing things differently once I've given them information, and I think we're on the same page. Several of my friends, from both high school and college that I did talk to a lot about veganism are vegan now. And those tend to be the people that I have stayed in closest touch with. So yeah, definitely it's impacted my relationships in that it is still hard for me to understand how people can learn this information. And these are people in environments and places that have had access to, and very easily could have gone vegan and continued to choose not to. Usually it's never really been me that's ended those. It's me speaking up to those issues or sharing information and feeling like other people get self-conscious or don't like me sharing information, feel like I talk about veganism too much, and have pulled away, in those types of situations.
Could you be with someone who eats animals?
No. I could date someone, sure, if it was ever to become a serious relationship or, get married. You gotta be vegan. And not because I care about your diet, but because if you think that it's okay, if you have the ability and resources to go vegan and think that it's okay not to, or choose not to for reasons of convenience, taste, pleasure, then I think our values just aren't aligned enough to be in that close of a relationship.
How do you deal with family members that are not vegan during holidays?
My family, my extended family is definitely not the most vegan friendly outside of, my immediate family. And my grandparents, who are no longer alive, they were. And most of our holidays, we did stuff with them. So my parents have always hosted like a vegan Thanksgiving, and basically the way we handled that holiday was we started inviting family members to join us. We don't want to sit and watch, you dying around a turkey, dead turkey, so we're going to host it. You're welcome to come, and we'd love to have you, but it's going to be an all-vegan meal. So that's kind of how we've handled Thanksgiving, and now at this point in time, my grandparents are no longer alive. They always came and were very supportive. Many of my aunts and uncles do not join us for holidays, and we just don't really do holidays together at this point. Or we'll do, if it's more of an open house type of thing with some family, we'll come after the meal. Like, oh, you're all getting together, great, let us know when you're done eating, and we'll come after that. We find ways to work around it.
Do you have any regrets?
Not really. Like, of course there's things I wish I'd done differently and things that I think about, but I tend to look at it and see the positive in those things, see what I learned out of those experiences or what it taught me. And I like where life has taken me now, so I don't know if it would be different if I'd done something different. So it's hard for me to say I really regret those things.
What are some mistakes you've made?
I am a huge people pleaser. I think there are lots of times where I haven't spoken up for animals or about veganism in the way I would have liked. And I've learned from those experiences. There are, mistakes where I don't think I spoke clearly or adequately or up enough, and I kind of let things simmer or didn't speak to them. And I wish I'd been clearer and stronger in how I spoke. Activism has been a huge learning curve. I have tried many, many different types of activism and approaches, and definitely made mistakes. Definitely saw like, oh, nope, that didn't work. Oh, that didn't go over very well. All learning experiences, and my views on what the best way to approach activism has changed over the years as well, as a result of many of the mistakes and little things that have happened.
How do you encourage others to be vegan?
What I find most effective today is talking to people, whether one-on-one or in a group. I think that a combination of sharing facts and information and asking questions, the Socratic method, really getting people to question their own actions and whether or not they're in alignment with values they already hold. I think that is most effective, at least for me. I also think what's effective depends on the person and what your skills and interests are. For me, I love talking to people, I love teaching, I love engaging with people, and I think one of my favorite things I have done, and I consider myself a vegan educator, so I make YouTube videos, Instagram videos, I speak in person, I teach workshops, I do protest, I try everything. But the thing that I have found most effective and that I most enjoy as well is on that educator level. When I was teaching high school a couple years ago, we had this winter break, they called it winterim class, and it was like this 3-day class before the actual school year or semester started again, where teachers could pick topics that they were interested in outside of the normal, academic spectrum, and teach a class. And students, got to pick these classes. And I developed and taught essentially a 3-day vegan class. So I had, 40 students with me for 3 days. I was able to teach them about the ethics, the environmental facts, the nutrition information, and do lots of hands-on activities. So, I do these spectrum activities where you have you say statements and then, you have agree and disagree. sides of the room, and things like, I need animal protein to build muscle. And so I make that statement, and then I ask the students, how much they agree or disagree with that, and they spread out across the spectrum. And those types of activities where you're getting to see what someone else's actual beliefs and assumptions are, they get to see what other people around them think, they get to dialogue, they get to ask you questions, and then I can present information like, oh, here's a study, or look at this short video about, animal protein versus plant protein. And then in that context, getting to frame things in terms of animal rights and why we don't need to consume animals, but doing it in a way where I'm providing the necessary information to counter myths, but really getting other people to do their own critical thinking and ask themselves what they believe, what they care about, what their values are, and what their actions should be in accordance with that. I've found that to be the most powerful because there's other types of activism where you're kind of in the moment on trying to get people to say, like, I agree with veganism or not, or yes, I'm going to go vegan or not. But you don't really know whether people are sticking with that or not, or how much that's really, changing things. And I feel like these more in-depth, really getting people to sort of question their actions and beliefs has a bigger chance of having a more long-term impact and having people that actually, become anti-speciesist ethical vegans and aren't just like, oh wow, I did this for health, like I wanna be healthier, so I'm going vegan for this month or this year. How much is that really gonna help shift the paradigm in society to one that doesn't exploit animals versus people who maybe take longer or isn't about the immediate going vegan, but they really question their ethics and morals and maybe shift over time.
Do you have any success stories you'd like to share?
Yeah, so the class I taught at that high school, I had several students. I had these forms where I basically asked students before the class, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to go vegan? And then I did the same after the class. And I had a couple, most of the students shifted on average a few points here or there from the beginning to end. And I had a couple students, in particular 2, I think, who went from almost a 1 to a 10 afterwards and told me that they were going vegan after that class. One student I know from that class ended up writing her sort of senior research paper the following year on the environmental impacts of animal agriculture as well. So I think that's pretty cool when I can help, especially high school students at, a young age when they're looking for ways to make a difference and sort of discover themselves and what they care about. I think those people are really important and going to be a huge piece of changing the future. And then I have some friends, my roommate in college, she's a wonderful person, and I was talking to her about veganism for many, many years, and she always, more or less agreed and was very sympathetic, but just, hadn't put the actions with it. And after enough time, finally, I think I asked her one day, and this was actually post-college, it took many years, which I think is really important for people to realize how long that transition can be for some people. That, it was 7 years or more of me being friends with her, talking to her, watching documentaries with her, sharing information, and she always more or less agreed with it. And then eventually she was just like, oh yeah, I guess I am vegan now. I haven't, had dairy since, yeah. And then she started attending animal rights protests and events with me when we lived in town together, and that was very cool.
All right, now we're going to eat a food.
Okay.
Are there certain foods vegan children need to eat more or less of?
I think what children need to be eating is somewhat based on their personal situations and families. So, if you're an athlete or if you're on the taller or shorter side or faster growing, I know that boys tend to eat a lot more than girls in general. And I think we had only girls in our family, and our family's also short on average, and we come from an Ashkenazi Jewish background. Most of my relatives are shorter than average as well. So we were not the, super fast growing children that were just sprouting up and needing lots and lots of food. But I did competitive gymnastics, and I ate a lot. because of that. So I think it kind of depends on the situation and what your environment is like and your personal genes and etc. I can't think of anything in particular other than just, same thing for adults in general, a wide variety of healthy whole plant foods, and to make sure you're getting enough calories. So yeah, if you're hungry or you feel like, you are behind the growth curve, or your kid is, then yeah, maybe more nuts and seeds and healthy fats and beans and in general, I'm a big fan of beans and legumes. I grew up eating lots of them. I eat them, large amounts of them, almost every day. They are a staple in my diet. And I think the biggest thing is getting enough of those calories so that you feel full as a child. I mean, that's true as an adult too.
What foods do you recall eating as a child for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
Oatmeal, that was definitely a common breakfast. Avocado toast, I joke with friends sometimes that I was eating avocado toast way before it was cool and trendy. I remember my mom would put like little chopped up pieces of raw garlic. We'd have, our bread and our avocado, and then chopped up pieces of garlic, especially if we did have a little cold or something, and she was trying to get us to eat raw garlic rather than swallowing it. We'd have lots of avocado toast with raw garlic on it. Crackers and avocado, rice cakes and avocado, lots of avocado. That was a snack, that was a breakfast. Lunch and dinners, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between them. Stir fries, soups, salads, veggie burgers, my mom cooked most of our meals. We never really ate out or did takeout. And we'd have leftovers then. She'd make a big pot of soup, and especially when I was in school, then I'd take jars of soup to school the next day. And this was pretty true even when I was really little. Some people, are really into like kid food or what they feed their kids. Even non-vegans do this. Like they have food that's kid food or separate from what adults eat. We never did that. It was like we ate whatever my parents were eating and cooked. And I think I learned to have a pretty wide and varied palate because of that too. We never had special kid food, baby food, any of that. It was like, oh, we're having a stir fry tonight. We're all having stir fry. Steamed green beans, tofu, loved tofu sandwiches. That was a big lunch and dinner. That was one of my favorite meals, I think, as a kid. But yeah, I never really ate special or unique food, separate than what my parents were eating. And I feel like we just ate veganized versions of everything for our lunch and dinners, especially.
What type of foods are most important for vegan toddlers, children, and teens?
So yeah, for raising vegan kids, the things that are really important: pulses, beans, lentils, the foods that are most associated with longevity. There are studies that show, a cup of pulses adds, X amount to your life expectancy, and that's what we've found looking at populations around the world. Even soy, a lot of people are scared of soy. No reason to be scared of soy. It's a very healthful food, especially, as long as it's organic. Soy, black beans, chickpeas, you want definitely that healthy protein source. Healthy fats, especially for growing children, your nuts, seeds, your omegas, your chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, also really important. Your beans, your grains, and then your veggies and your greens. Dark leafy greens are extremely important, and fruit. So I'd just the varied plant-based diet, but I'd say, beans, grains, fruit, greens, and your nuts and seeds and healthy fats. I just point people to Daily Dozen. I don't do much on the nutrition side of things at this point. I'm just talking about ethics and environmental stuff. Go find the Daily Dozen.
Have you ever tasted meat, eggs, or dairy? If so, when and why, and what was that like?
Never tasted meat. I've never intentionally tasted any of those things. I accidentally had a piece of milk chocolate once, and this experience stands out in my head. I was at a potluck. It was not a vegan potluck. And there were, these chocolate bars. And I think my sister read the ingredients of one and was like, oh, it's vegan. And one was mint chocolate and one was milk chocolate. And the packages looked very similar, but one was open and one was not. So I think, she read the non-open package and thought it was the same as the open package and was like, here, and, handed my mom and I each a piece of this chocolate. I was a teenager, I think. And I remember putting it in my mouth and then going, something's wrong. This is weird. This is not like chocolate. I was used to eating dark chocolate and this was milk chocolate. And I was like, that's weird. And I remember thinking it was gross and not liking it. and spitting it out. And my mom realized pretty quickly too, and was like, no, that's milk chocolate. That's not vegan. And now this gets a lot harder because vegan options have gotten so much better. There's like really good and realistic, like vegan milk chocolate, oat milk chocolate and stuff. But there wasn't at that time. And I remember thinking it was gross and weird, and I did not like it. So that's about the extent of my tasting. You know, I'm sure, and I think I've accidentally eaten like pasta, again at a potluck, that had egg in it. It wasn't a vegan pasta, I didn't know. Nothing intentional, and definitely no meat. I didn't swallow it, and I didn't like it. It was like, this is weird, and I think I had the thought, something's wrong. Like I knew instantly, it was like, this is not right. This is not, you know, I think I knew on a gut level this wasn't vegan. I wasn't used to this. And I spit it out really quickly. And it tasted gross to me. Like, I did not like it. I don't know if I'd have that same experience today because I've since had very good tasting vegan milk chocolate. I have no idea how realistic it really even is. I have that one memory of that, you know, one experience. But I know at the time I thought it was gross and weird, and I knew it was wrong. Like, something was off. And I didn't like it.
What kind of foods do you enjoy eating now as an adult?
I cook a fair amount on my own. Like I said, I eat a lot of beans. I made this week bean burritos. I tried a crunch wrap type of thing with like a scrambled tofu filling in it as well. And then yesterday I made Chinese like sticky sesame cauliflower. So it was like a baked cauliflower with tofu and veggies in a stir-fry sauce. I love Indian curries. I have Vegan Richa's Indian Cookbook, one of my favorites. And like yellow lentil curries or masala lentils. Beans and greens, I'll saute like some garlic and bok choy or kale and a can of black beans. Like I said, I eat beans like almost every day in some form. And I eat a lot of rice, so it's a lot of variations of rice and beans type of things. Soups, stir fries. I really don't do much in the way of like veggie burgers or mock meats a whole lot on my own. When I go out to eat, sometimes I do. And I go through periods where I don't even cook that much with tofu. Like I have plenty of times where people are like, do you eat a lot of tofu? And I'm like, I don't even eat that much tofu. Sometimes I do more. I like tofu a lot. But I rely on beans. And a variety of them, black beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, pinto. Like I have different things for different ones. It's like I want, white beans with my bok choy. I want black beans on my, salad today. I eat a lot of salads, big salads too. I'll eat like those big boxes of like 1 pound boxes of like mixed pre-washed, organic greens. I'm kind of lazy in the kitchen sometimes too. So if I have to like wash and chop my lettuce, I know I won't eat as much of it. So I really like to buy those boxes of mixed greens, and I can eat about like a third of one of those boxes in one sitting. I'll take a third of that box of lettuce, put it in a big bowl, can of black beans. Sometimes I'll put some, tofu, nutritional yeast, a whole variety from tomatoes, mushrooms, frozen corn, peas. I have like 10 different, variations of my salad that I can do. Salsa as a dressing, balsamic vinegar as a dressing, more Italian style, more of a ranch. Like I mix it up. So I eat salad all the time, especially in the summer, but they're very different salads.
How much of your diet was raw as a child, and how much of it is raw now?
I don't know how much of my diet was raw as a child. There were times where we did more raw foods. I think in the summer sometimes, my mom would be like, let's try and go raw. And what she would make would be more raw. And I think I probably did more raw as a kid than now because I used to eat a lot more fruit. I probably do not eat enough fruit today as an adult. In the summer especially, I do like green smoothies and I put a lot of berries and fruit in those. But when I'm not doing smoothies, I don't buy a lot of fruit and I don't snack on a lot of fruit. So I probably could do more of that. And in the summer, I lean more raw, but I'm not very raw right now. Especially in the winter, I really like my chilies and soups and warm cooked food. There are periods and there are times where I'm more raw. And definitely, I think as a kid, I did more raw food, more carrot sticks, more, veggies and fruit and stuff like that. But I don't have a percentage.
How are your iron levels?
when I started cross country in college, everyone had to get their ferritin levels checked because it's very normal for female runners to have low iron levels. And my iron came back low, not extremely low, on the low end. There were some people on the team when their levels came back where they like literally weren't allowed to run because their ferritin was too low. And it was about half the team that had low iron levels. So it's a very common problem among females regardless of your diet. So I did start supplementing with just an herbal iron, not anything too strong, and making more of an effort to eat, more dark leafy greens and iron-rich foods, and with a fat source as well at the same time, and with vitamin C, just to help the absorption and all of that. I have had them tested at different times, and there's also different types of iron. There's the ferritin, there's, bound and unbound iron. I haven't been consistent enough in the testing of like all the different types to like really know. I have never noticed, and I was surprised when I got back my ferritin test in college that was on the lower side, because I've never noticed energy issues or had anything. So I've never felt like I had anemia or experienced any problems from that. And I didn't really notice anything one way or the other once I started supplementing or once my levels did come back up. The other thing is I've been gluten-free on and off at times, longer story. And there is some research that suggests that iron deficiency for some people, if they are gluten sensitive, can be linked with that. And I don't remember all of the information off the top of my head, but I have experimented with that too. So there was after my first year of cross country in college, I studied abroad, and that was probably the most unhealthy period of eating in my life. I was in South Africa and going out to pubs and bars and restaurants with people all the time. And the main thing I was eating were lots of French fries, apples, and peanut butter. That was the most unhealthy I felt, the most out of shape I felt, pretty much in my life as well. And I was also eating lots of gluten after a period of being generally, pretty gluten-free for many years. And so there's too many variables personally for me to really know what really made the difference or most impacted my iron and iron absorption. Was it the gluten I was eating? Was it the horrible, junky, unhealthy diet I was eating? I don't really know, but I have had my iron tested since then and haven't, my iron levels have been up the last time I got them tested. And I occasionally supplement an herbal iron, and I still try to eat iron-rich foods because of that. And the longer part of the story is the gluten thing. I'm more or less gluten-free. I don't really buy gluten myself and bring it into my home. I'm not strict about it at this point because I don't really notice anything. That the potential iron absorption issue was really the main symptom I may or may not have noticed. It's something that at some point maybe I'll experiment more with, more testing, more trying to eat different things, seeing if it affects my absorption. I've run 2 half marathons since that time of having my iron levels be on the lower side. My levels have come up, and I still supplement sometimes, but I don't worry about it too much.
Do you have symptoms?
So no, and I don't. The gluten thing is not a big thing I care about.
Like any anemic symptoms?
No, I had no anemic symptoms. I had no symptoms of anemia in any way. I didn't feel anything. It was just the blood levels showed that my ferritin levels were lower than they should be, especially for running cross country. But I've never had any symptoms.
Could it be that just we're comparing, like we don't know what vegans' levels should be,
I don't know, because this was for cross country, and they specifically wanted the ferritin tests, not the normal like iron tests. I will add this, just the one thing I did notice is I did used to have pretty bad cramps and symptoms around my period. But I figured out after experimenting, because that was something that I did struggle with for a long time, water. Literally, it was an issue of not drinking enough water. And I think this is really important because I wonder how many other, women out there potentially struggle with that. And I noticed this because I had different periods in my life where like my symptoms would go away for several months at a time. I was volunteering in Haiti for several months in a rural town where we were getting up super early, working during the day, pretty hard physically, going to bed early, so I was pretty in sync with the circadian, my circadian rhythm in a way that I'm not normally. I go to bed much later here, but I was going to bed and we were working hard and I was drinking tons of water. So all I noticed, I didn't realize at the time it was water, but I was like, wow, while I was in Haiti, why would my symptoms just go away for, the several months that I was in Haiti? That doesn't make any sense. And then I noticed it again when I was training for my first half marathon. And I did a period of eating super healthy, unprocessed, no oil, no sugar, almost no salt, but definitely no oil, sugar, flour, and processed foods for the 2 months before I ran my half marathon. And I was also making an effort to go to bed early again. I was drinking a lot of tea and a lot of water during that time period. And I noticed during there was a 6-month period where my symptoms completely went away. So I kind of had this, I did a little bit of, experimenting on myself, oh, is it sleep? Is it that, going to bed early makes the difference? Is it, cutting the oil and fat out? Is that what makes the difference? Oh, is it losing a little bit of weight? I just wasn't sure. And it took me a while to realize that nothing, the other things impacted a little bit, but the number one factor is as long as I drink enough water in the 5 days leading up to my period, I have almost no symptoms, no cramps anymore. And if I don't drink enough water in those few days, then I have cramps.
Could it be physical activity too, though? Because every time you're in Haiti or you're...
Yes, there definitely, I think the other things impact it as well.
Physical activity.
Physical activity and sleep also seem, and diet, the less oil, less fat, definitely seems to impact it. But even when I'm not doing those other things and I drink enough water, that still seems to be the number one underlying thing.
One thing that I've noticed is I've heard people, just a couple of people, and then I met somebody who doesn't drink water. But the guy that I met, he really doesn't drink hard. He might drink a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening or something, but he eats a lot of raw foods. Mm-hmm. And I noticed you said you don't really eat as much as you want. So I wonder if you ate more raw foods, you get enough water from that maybe too. I don't know.
It's possible, but I try to drink 3 bottles of water a day.
But you got to be careful. You don't want to, even Furman's mentioned this. You don't want to flush out, minerals and stuff. Mm-hmm. That, if you drink too much water.
I do a lot of green tea now too, though. That seems to help.
Because they're high in tannins, they could prevent iron absorption. But I've heard no more than half your body weight in fluid ounces. Is probably good. How much water do you?
I think I do more than what's recommended because the recommended amount wasn't enough.
What do you think about people going on meat-based diets like Paleo, Keto, Carnivore? What do you think about that stuff?
I think that it's kind of ridiculous. I think there are some people that are having, some benefits or experiencing, they have the sensation or impression of, I feel better or something. And I do think it is true that a lot of times when people first go vegan, they use a lot of the, mock meats and transition foods, which most of them are straight gluten or isolated soy protein, often highly processed plant foods that are not the healthiest. And if you are someone who is sensitive to gluten and you have the experience of going vegan and then feeling worse, so are some people having the experience of feeling better or experiencing a positive health outcome from these things? Yes. The science and data in the long term, though, do not support that these things are healthful or promote health and longevity in any way. And then, of course, there's the ethics and environmental toll of them. That absolutely cannot be compared to the ethics and environmental benefits of a plant-based diet.
Do you eat quote-unquote fake meats?
I definitely like a good, veggie hot dog, good veggie burger. I have found I'm not the biggest fan of the more realistic, Beyond and Impossible burgers. I've tried them. They're kind of too meaty. They have a flavor I don't like. I would much prefer a good black bean burger or just a basic veggie burger if I want a burger. They just taste more flavorful to me. But, I one of the things that I do like are sort of the vegan, chicken strips sometimes, usually made with soy. I like those in a stir fry. I like those I enjoy, eating those and doing stuff with them sometimes. I don't use them a lot in my own cooking. I will eat those things when I go out to a restaurant sometimes. But I'm very picky. It depends on what type of mock meat we're talking about. There's some I like and some I don't.
Will you eat lab-grown meat?
Absolutely not.
If your doctor said you have to eat animals, what would you do?
Find another alternative, do my own research. I think that's one of the differences and things that impacts, people that become ex-vegans, for example. I know people who have had health issues as long-term vegans. Obviously, it happens. There's other factors besides diet, that impacts health. The difference I've noticed between people that often go on to become ex-vegans because of a health issue and people who don't is their ethical conviction. If I was told I needed some nutrient or I needed this or that, or if I had a health issue legitimately, I would do everything I could to find ways to solve that did not involve killing animals, because I simply don't view animals as food. And it's kind of the comparison to cats and dogs. What if you learned that you could be 10 times healthier, eating dog meat or something, that, there's some nutrient that is only in that, you could improve, building your muscles or, whatever. Most people would still say, well, I don't want to eat dogs. That's fine. I'll live without having the biggest, bulkiest muscles possible. I guess I won't be as strong as I could be if I ate dog because, well, I don't view dogs as food. I don't want to eat them. That's how I view, eating animals. So you could tell me, sure, there's something I'm missing, there's something I need, and I'd say, okay, let me find another alternative. If I'm really sick or have a health issue, I will find a plant-based alternative.
Why do you think some people quit veganism?
And I know, like I said, long-term vegans who have had serious health issues and actually had sort of deteriorating health. One person I'm thinking of in particular was having ongoing chronic, just becoming unable to function in many ways and severe pain and mental fogginess, all the sort of things that a lot of ex-vegans point to as having had. And rather than assuming it was because they weren't eating animals and hadn't eaten animals for many years, this person went out of their way to figure out what could be causing the problem and learned that all of the old mercury fillings in their teeth were sort of leaching and they were getting mercury poisoning, chronic degenerative, mercury poisoning, and they found a dentist who removed all their fillings and they got better. Never had to eat animal products. And I think that's true because that person had a conviction about what they were doing. And if you don't have that ethical conviction, there's all kinds of forces in society that are going to tell you, you need to eat animal products. That's what your health problems are from. That's what your issues are. That's why, And if you're not really strong in those convictions, I think you're much more likely to be swayed and be one of these people that will become an ex-vegan. Because in our society, you're automatically going to go, oh, is it because I'm not eating animals? Is this health issue because I'm not eating meat? Would it be fixed if I did this? People jump to it and think it is, and maybe even have sort of a placebo effect where because they believe that was the issue, they start eating animal products again and believe they feel better because maybe they wanted to, were craving it, missed it, society told them that's what they needed, and they didn't stick with that. They didn't have or stick with that ethical conviction and seek out the real root cause or find other alternatives. So I think people quit veganism for a variety of different reasons. But the biggest one, I think, is that regardless of what people say, whether they say it's for health or social reasons or whatnot, it is hard on some level being different, doing something so different, seeing the world so different. It's like, fish that don't know they're in water. We are living in a world that is so incredibly filled with propaganda and biased information. The air we breathe is telling us that animals are food, that they are objects and property status, that we can do what we want with them, that it's natural, that it's normal, that it's necessary. That if you aren't consciously aware of that and realizing, I think the minute we become aware of a force that's acting on us or in society, then we can address it properly and respond to it and not, act just based on that. But if you're not aware of it, it's really, really hard to see and reject it. And I think that is what is happening with most ex-vegans. Whether they believe it's a health issue or something going on, I think on some level they are caving to the normative dogma in society, whether it's the moral and ethics of believing we can consume animals, there's nothing wrong with it, it's natural, whether they really think it's necessary for their health, and don't realize it's those unconscious societal forces and normalized violence that are dictating what they do. And so they can't choose or act different because they don't even realize that that's what they're acting off of. Some people it's more obvious. I think they just don't want to be left out. They don't want to, miss social situations. They want to get along. I don't think the health thing is really what's driving most people. I think it's those other forces that are sometimes disguised as health, or that people are convincing themselves are health, or that they have to. And maybe there are some exceptions, I don't know, but in my experience, I feel like most of the time it's, completely avoidable.
Especially when they're like flip-flopping their diet and they're going to a meat-eating doctor. Is it a meat-eating doctor? I mean, of course that he's going to say eat animals.
Oh yeah, the people that go back and forth too, and like, well, I tried. Clearly they were never. I mean, the other piece of it is the people that never really understood and were never really grounded in the ethics. What has surprised me, I used to think that if you were an ex-vegan, you were never really vegan in the first place, that you never got the ethics. It's hard for me to say that now because I have met a number of people who I really believed, and by all means, like they were activists. They were seemed like, actual, like really honest, dedicated, ethical vegans. And those situations, usually it was they flip-flopped for health reasons. And maybe there are some cases where some people really do, I don't know. It's hard for me to say without being in their shoes or knowing what they've tried, or, I'm not their doctor and I'm not a health expert in that way. I like to believe that they just didn't try hard enough and that it is possible to figure out what's really going on or solve those health issues. But it is confusing. I have a hard time saying oh, if you're an ex-vegan, you never really got veganism. Because I have met people who I really feel like they did. I don't, So that's kind of why I go more to the societal explanation of on some level, they were still unconsciously falling prey to the forces in society, the normalization of consuming animals, that they resorted to that.
Any thoughts on fasting?
I have experimented with intermittent fasting. I'm not currently doing it. I like it. I often accidentally end up doing it right now just because of the way my schedule is. I end up waking up late, and this is not the way I would like to be doing it, so that's why I say it's accidental. I end up not eating until dinner and kind of doing the one meal a day, but having a late dinner, at 7 or 8, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't recommend it. I would like to do more of a early in the day eating, but like I said, that's accidental. I'm not intentionally trying to do that right now, but I have experimented. I've done 3-day water fasts. That's the longest I've gone. I haven't done anything longer than that. And then I've done the time restricted intermittent fasting. I've tried variations of the every other day, the one meal a day, the not after a certain time, and I like it. I just don't always have the willpower to stick with it, and I like food. But I feel better and healthier, especially when I don't eat late in the day, and I'd prefer to go back to that.
What supplements do you think are important for vegan children?
B12, vitamin D. I mean, those are the two big ones. I feel like I don't have as much of an opinion on an omega-3 supplement, especially I think if you're eating a lot of flax, chia, walnuts, that type of thing. And I think it depends on how healthy your diet is. I think there's a lot more supplements if you're, a junk food vegan or eating lots of processed foods and not getting an adequate amount of leafy greens and vegetables and whole foods. Then yeah, you might want to take a zinc selenium. There might be more supplements you want to take if you're eating a super healthy diet and getting most of your nutrients from plants. I tend to think B12 and vitamin D are really the two main ones. And they're the ones that I've really been consistent in and that I continue to think are important.
What supplements did you take as a vegan child and take now as an adult?
It is possible to become B12 deficient, especially as a child if you don't have reserves sort of more stored up. So I did supplement B12. I have been all my life. And I also have and continue to take vitamin D supplements, mostly just in the winter. I often, don't in the summer, but I live in a latitude and place where it's cold and I'm not outside and I'm not getting good sun exposure. And I definitely think taking a vitamin D supplement can be really important.
Do you have any allergies?
I'm mildly allergic to cats, which is what makes me think that if I'd been eating dairy, I probably could have been predisposed to a lot more allergies. I have at times been mildly allergic to sometimes, different nuts and seeds, like very briefly, and my dad has allergies to some nuts and seeds, but they haven't lasted. As a kid, I had a very brief period where I kind of was acting allergic to soy, went away, got over it, and that happened to be at a time where I was eating soy in conjunction with some soda pop that had artificial sweetener in it that my grandmother was feeding me and nobody knew about. And I was eating them right together at the same time, like this artificially sweetened drink and like soy ice cream every week when I visited one of my grandparents. And when I stopped drinking that soda pop and stopped maybe having ice cream every week for a little while, that went away. I've never had any soy allergies since then.
Do you have any chronic diseases or take any medications?
Nope.
Have you ever had a doctor tell you that you should eat animals?
Not eat animals, but dairy. I remember one doctor as a kid freaking out, really believing that I was going to be, have weak bones and calcium deficient, and was kind of shocked when that wasn't the case. And my family and I now as an adult have sought out doctors, of course, that are supportive. And to me, that's a red flag. Doctors obviously have a variety of opinions and beliefs. And yeah, if a doctor tells me I need to eat meat, I'm going to be like, I'm out of here. I'm going to see a different doctor.
Do you have a plant-based doctor?
I don't really have a doctor right now. I go to the doctor so infrequently. Yeah, pretty much never. There's a plant-based nurse practitioner in the Kansas City area who, if I did need something, I would go to, but I don't see the need for regular doctor visits, and so wouldn't say I have a regular doctor at this point.
Are you comfortable going to a doctor that isn't plant-based?
Yeah, when I was working at the school, when I was teaching high school and I had really good health insurance through that, I did see a doctor through that system, and we never even talked about it, never even came up, so I assume she was not. As long as they are supportive for whatever I need or whatever I'm going for, and they aren't advocating for eating animal products or saying things that to me are blatant red flags of misunderstanding or not knowing the science, then yeah, I don't have a problem, especially if it's for something else, unrelated.
Do you think others should consider raising their children vegan?
Everyone should raise their children vegan, especially if you're vegan. If you're not, you should go vegan and raise your kids vegan. I believe it is how we will change the world. Societal change, it starts with people having a different mentality. It starts with a paradigm shift. We need a paradigm shift away from the normalized violence, away from believing that animals are products and things to use and consume. And I think raising children who see that from day one, who recognize, like I do, that you can live a happy and healthy life without eating animals, that you don't need these things, they aren't necessary, and to sort of see past all that propaganda, and of course learn to do critical thinking as well. I think the world would be a lot better place, and that could really significantly change things if more people raised their kids vegan.
What advice do you have for parents wanting to raise their children vegan? that might not be intuitive, or just any advice at all?
My best piece of advice is the education. And that doesn't necessarily mean, showing your kid graphic footage or, violent videos of animal slaughter, which I never actually saw until I was like 16. But just talking to them. Like I said, society has all these forces. You have peers, you have TV shows, you have, it is so normalized into the very air we breathe and navigate in this world that if you don't present counter information and educate your children about why you're eating differently, about why you're living differently, about why you're vegan and what it is, I think it's so easy for kids to unconsciously fall prey to that, to want to do something different. And I think they will be much stronger in what they're doing if you educate them and give them the power then, of course, to make the choice for themselves and understand what they're doing. So it's not about forcing your kid to think like you do or what you do. It's about presenting the truth, and in a strong enough way that it counters the, vast amount of untruthful propaganda that they're going to be facing. Society is not a values neutral place. So you have to share your values and vegan values with your kids if you want them to understand it and adopt it for themselves.
What advice do you have for children growing up vegan?
Find people that are supportive and find mentors. Maybe, there are people that have pen pals online. There are, I guess this is for parents too, vegan conferences, meetups, finding that community where you can bring your children and introduce them to other vegan kids so they have that space, so they have those environments where, everything's vegan and they don't have to ask, they don't have to be the different kid. They can have those experiences of sort of fitting in and being like everyone else in a certain space. I think that's really helpful. And as a kid, having other people to look up to, having other kids that you can talk to, even if it's on the phone or at a distance, a friend from a vegan conference or something, so that you can talk about, oh, I had this issue in school, oh, these kids have been teasing me. Someone that you can commiserate with if those issues come up, who, feels like you do. Social support is just so crucial and so powerful for everything we do, but especially veganism.
Any tips for parents trying to transition their children to a vegan diet?
So, honestly, this is one I don't know as much about because I never had to do it. And yeah, transitioning kids to something new can be very tricky. I had friends when I was growing up, other families that were sort of going vegan. Their kids hadn't been raised vegan. And I saw that from a distance a little bit. And there were times where the kids fought it, didn't want it, didn't like it. And again, I think the explaining what you're doing, especially, that might be more of a place where you do want to share a video or share information with your children. I think vegan kids don't need that, especially the graphic footage, as much because they're already vegan and more likely to be supportive. But if you're changing or doing something different or feel like you're being forced to do something different, then it might be really helpful to understand that why a lot better. And I would also say that might be a really good time to make use of the vegan mock meats, the replacement foods. If your kids are, very attached to certain types of foods they've been eating, being able to replace those. And sure, it might not be the healthiest, but making that adjustment in steps so that they don't feel like they're losing their comfort foods or favorite foods and things, and they can just have vegan versions of those. I think that would be really helpful as well.
What can children who want to be vegan do if their parents don't understand, support, or encourage them, or are even against it?
This is such a tricky one that I, thought about a lot as a high school teacher, having high school students that would say they wanted to do this and that their parents weren't supportive. What can they do? And, as an adult, I think it's a very tricky position to be in because, part of me wants to say, well, you just need to stick your ground. Yeah, stand up to your parents. Tell them this is what you're doing, don't care what they, But, especially when I was in the role as a teacher, that's not something that's going to go over very well with parents. And I think it is a difficult ethical area. The biggest thing I, tell people is do the best you can in the situation you're in now. And when you're an adult and can make your own choices, then of course you can go vegan. I would, like to be able to tell, kids or teens that you could go vegan now and sort of force your parents to listen to you, but I'm not in every family and every situation, and I think it's too complex of a topic to make a broad statement like that. And, some kids that may work if they just say, I'm not doing this, I'm not eating animals, deal with it. And it really just may not work in other, families and dynamics. So then you do the best you can. If you, and if your parents are open, I say, sort of go the opposite direction. Try and show a video to your parents. Try and share information with them about why you want to do this. Don't just, say you want to do it. Like, share your reasons why. But again, every family is different, and I know plenty of situations where teens especially have tried that and their parents will refuse. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it. And, they basically say, no, you can't go vegan. You have to, eat what I put in front of you. And I can't really navigate that family, for anyone else. So that's kind of just, once you're an adult and you can make your own choices, you'll be able to go vegan then.
What about those isolated cases where parents have been arrested for abuse or neglect who just happen to be raising their children vegan?
I think they get spun so out of, proportion by the media. The real issue here is abuse and neglect. It has nothing to do with whether or not they're raising their kids vegan. There are reports every single day, sad, unfortunate reports of non-vegan families died or got very sick of malnutrition or starvation. And no one holds those families up, and the media doesn't hold them up and say, it was your, non-vegan diet. It was you feeding a kid, steak every day and only steak or whatever. Like, they should have been vegan. That would have, no. People recognize they didn't feed their kids an adequate diet. They only fed them one food, or they starved them or didn't give them water. It's abuse and neglect. That's the problem. And so then when you have a family who happens to be eating a plant-based diet or, only feeding their kid quinoa milk or something random and not feeding them enough adequate food, that has nothing to do with veganism or the fact that there weren't any animal products in that. That has to do with the fact that they were neglectful and not feeding their kids an adequate, well-rounded diet. And the media loves to use those cases and make it about veganism, and it's not. They're about abuse and neglect, and whether or not you happen to be eating plant foods or not in those situations is pretty irrelevant.
Got a quote you want to share?
I love the Margaret Mead quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. I've just always resonated with that quote and really loved it because people, come at me a lot in the course of my vegan activism and say, well, you're just one person. One person can't make a difference. One person can't change anything, or there's too few vegans. It's not going to make a difference. Every movement, look at it this way. A few people in 1944 coined the term vegan. The whole world knows the term vegan now. That was a few people in an attic, 80 years ago. The power of individuals to change the whole system, to change themselves, to change the world is, really real. And if more people realized the power they had, and how much it started with themselves. No, I may not be able to change other people, but if we all just started by living our life in alignment with our values or doing what we could in our small sphere to make a difference, I think collectively that would be huge. And that's what I hear when I hear Margaret Mead's quote.
Is there anything about vegans you'd like to see change? Maybe why we're annoying or something?
Ooh, I want to change vegans as much as I want to change other people. We have our flaws, we have our issues. This is more usually a question of tactics in the movement. yeah, are there critiques I have? Are there things I really don't like? Are there certain aspects of the movement, people in the movement that I strongly disagree with and wish weren't doing what they were doing? Absolutely. I used to care a lot more about that. I feel like as time has gone on, I feel like it's a better use of my time to focus on creating the positive change I want to see and focusing on the good. I think critiquing things that are problematic is important too, and I still do plenty of that, but I just don't want to focus on that as much. You know, everything from communication styles. I've been at plenty of protests where, yes, you know, people fit that angry vegan stereotype, and someone, you know, walking by gets mad and, you know, says, I love bacon, or I hate vegans, and, you know, an angry vegan in our group will say, you know, yell something back, well, I hate you, or, you know, whatever. And yeah, do I really wish I could stop that from happening? Because I don't think that's helpful or productive, and I wish I could help many people communicate about veganism very differently. And I do what I can. I share my perspective and information, but I can't control what other people do, vegan or otherwise. And I guess one of the other things, I'll add this, that I really wish was different about the vegan movement is that people were a little bit more aware of how vegans are still people too, and we can still replicate some of the problematic dynamics and exploitation that exist in the rest of our world in the vegan movement. And, you know, whether we're talking about the Me Too movement and we look at how there are some unfortunate examples of, you know, sexual exploitation happening with vegan figures. It's not special to vegans. All that crap is happening in the rest of the world and in politics. And sometimes I feel like vegans sort of assume when someone's vegan, they can do no wrong. They're this perfect person. They're ethical. You know, we can't critique them. There's no problem. And we're all still just human. And I guess I wish more people recognized that vegans and the vegan movement are not immune from some of the problems that still plague the rest of society.
Do you think we'll ever see a vegan world, and how can we get there?
I do. Sometimes it's hard to keep in mind. I feel like I hold two different realities in my head at the same time. One is, you know, we're all doomed. This is hopeless. I don't see how this is ever going to work. And the other one is this belief that absolutely, you know, it's going to happen and we will see a vegan world. And I feel like the way that we will see a vegan world is through a paradigm shift and reaching a tipping point. So, and this is sort of very particular, but I would rather that, you know, 10 or 15% of the population became really strong, ethical vegans, even vegan activists, grounded in the ethics of animal rights and not harming animals, rather than, say, 80 or 90% of the world being reducitarians or vegetarians or eating much less meat. Even though, objectively speaking, I can see that, you know, having a large percentage of the world eating much less meat might reduce the demand for meat and reduce the amount of animals killed more than a few people going vegan, I don't think that would get us to a vegan world, because it's not just about what people consume or do. It's about that paradigm shift from believing or recognizing that animals are objects or things to use to believing or recognizing that they are sentient individuals in their own right who have a right to their body and life, and that we have no right to exploit and use them as we want. And I don't think we'll see a vegan world without that paradigm shift. Just people changing their diet or doing things differently. We'll find other ways to exploit animals. We'll continue to hunt or do this or that, because we won't have changed that underlying notion that it's okay to use animals. But I think having a smaller percentage of the population that are dedicated ethical vegans and activists who really view speciesism as an ism and a problem in society that needs to be dismantled, that I think could create a ripple effect that could transform society much quicker than we realize. And there's social, you know, movements research and other movements we can look to where we see a small group of people that strongly held a belief, you know, created a tipping point and sort of rapidly changed society way quicker than we realize by creating a new normalized ethic or belief. And I think, you know, I don't know what that tipping point is, whether it's, you know, 10, 15, 20, 25%. There's lots of different estimates, and I think every movement is different, but I think that's what will do it, is when we have enough people that hold the ethic that animals are not ours to use, that can create a paradigm shift in society.
What would a vegan world look like?
A vegan world would look like one where animals are free to live on their own terms. We have rewilded much of the planet to them. We recognize, the sentient worth of both humans, and all of our fellow earthlings. We are not intentionally exploiting them or using them in any way for anything, and we recognize their right to land and freedom, and we find a way to live in peaceful coexistence, sharing this planet. And that may have to mean dismantling our exploitative, capitalistic, consumerist-driven world as well, into a way where we're not constantly trying to extract more resources and more profit from this planet. I don't know the specifics of what it would look like, but it would mean that we find a way not just to not use animals, but also give them their land and water, not pollute the land and water for them either, for ourselves as well. We have to find that way to live in peaceful coexistence in a way where we're not exploiting anyone, and manage to give everyone the freedom to live their lives as they want.
Anything else you want to share?
I think veganism has the power to change your life and the world. And I really believe it starts with individuals. There's a lot of debate and discussion these days about, systemic versus individual change, personal, consumer habits versus, politics. And while I think change, all of it's important, it all needs to change. And yeah, the system is corrupt and biased and problematic, and we need to dismantle it. We need to get rid of the subsidies and bailouts that unfairly prop up the animal agriculture industry. But honestly, I really do believe in the power of individuals, because the reality is, no matter how much we scream and march and protest, the only thing that any of us actually have control over or can change is ourselves and our actions. And I think that is way more powerful than we realize, and not necessarily in just the supply and demand consumerist way. I think that is very powerful too, but in the how we carry ourselves, the how we live our life, the what we show and present to other people about what matters to us. That's powerful. And you being a vegan, you taking a stand and saying, my life does not rely on harming others. I can live a happy and healthy life without exploiting any of our fellow earthlings. There is another way to do this. That's powerful and sends a message to your family and your friends, and I do think it's about planting seeds. Whether we realize it or not, we're influencing everyone around us on a daily basis. And with how we act too. I think there is a very personal and spiritual piece to this where, change starts with us internally too. Like, our internal mental state. If we want a more peaceful and compassionate world, we need peaceful and compassionate people. That means, we can't be angry and we have to live as the way we want to see things. And so I really feel like change starts with individuals, and we can still advocate for and want systemic change, but that doesn't discount the power of every one of us to make a difference. I have a website, bornvegan.org, and on my website, I offer a free downloadable vegan starter guide, essentially called a vegan living guide, and it has about 9 practical tips for how to actually make that transition and start going vegan, and then a recipe and a bunch of resources labeled by health, environment, ethics. So I have documentaries, I have books, I have websites. It's not comprehensive, but it's the basics of where I recommend people go. Because I don't always remember that off the top of my head. So nutritionfacts.org is one of my favorite sites for nutrition information, and I have that listed in there under the, here's where to go for good health information. Here's my top documentaries to get you started. If you want to learn more about getting involved in activism, here's the books to read, here's what to check out. So that's the resource that I send everyone to. I also just put up they're called vegan ingredient learning flashcards on my website that you can purchase and download. They're 40 ingredient flashcards that like have on one side whey, casein, different things that you might find on especially a non-vegan label. And then the other side of the flashcard is what that ingredient is, how it's made, whether it's, plant or animal based, and what the potential problems with it are. And these are a great resource. There's something I used as a child when I was learning to read labels that my parents made for me. I think it's a great resource, especially maybe if you have teens that you're trying to transition to a vegan diet or something too, to help them learn for themselves. Like, oh, when I see whey on the label, oh, here's how it's made. This is what it actually means. So I have that resource up there as well. www.bornvegan.org.